Good morning and welcome. This is our 15th annual Memorial Day ceremony on Boston Common, where we come together as a community to pay tribute to our Commonwealth's fallen heroes, to draw strength from their courageous example, and to rededicate ourselves to keep faith with their families. My name is Tom Crohan, and I'm a proud co-founder of the Massachusetts Military Heroes Fund. Before we begin our formal program, I wanted to speak to news we recently shared about MMHF merging with Home Base, cementing our long-standing collaboration. This merger made sense for lots of reasons, but the most important one was that we both believed it would improve the services, programs, and community events like this one for years to come. As part of the merger, Diane Nealon has now transitioned to serve as a director at Home Base, where she drives the day-to-day support provided to families of the fallen. On behalf of the MMHF board, Christy Coombs, Steve Kerrigan, Brigadier General M.A. Tom Devine, Dave Garino, and Maura Yanisek, we are incredibly grateful to Diane for her 15 years of unwavering and compassionate leadership and for the care and assistance she continues to provide. We're thankful to her and the entire Home Base team, especially Brigadier General retired U.S. Army Jack Hammond and Michael Allard, for their commitment to provide best-in-class programs and support to all those they serve today and into the future. With that, it's now my honor to introduce my friend, Michael Allard, Chief Operating Officer at Home Base.
Thank you, Tom. I would like to welcome and thank you all for being here with us today for this poignant ceremony. Behind me, as you can see, this breathtaking sea of red, white, and blue represents the true meaning of Memorial Day. As we look at this vast display, coupled with the somber reading of each name, we realize the heartbreaking reality that every flag represents a Massachusetts hero who gave their life for our nation and our freedom. A display of this magnitude is not possible without hundreds of leaders, organizations, and volunteers from around the Commonwealth coming together for one reason: to pay respect to the fallen. On behalf of Home Base, it is my extreme honor to recognize and thank those who have made this event happen. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the board from the Massachusetts Military Heroes Fund, as you just heard: Tom Crohan, Dave Garino, Tom Devine, Christy Coombs, and Maura Yanisek, as well as Steve Kerrigan. Thank you for your tireless efforts to bring not only this breathtaking ceremony to the Common year after year, but also ensuring that for over 15 years, Massachusetts bereaved military families have access to crucial resources when they need it. As many of you know, this past April, as you heard from Tom, MMHF officially became a part of our family at Home Base and joined in our mission. Now, MMHF at Home Base, through this partnership, enhances our ability to provide clinical care, support to Massachusetts families of the fallen of all eras, and all at no cost. Home Base is steadfastly committed to continuing this tradition here on the Common, as well as to providing support to for mental health and other critical care for our families. To Mayor Wu, Commissioner Santiago, Treasurer Goldberg, thank you for your leadership in ensuring that the City of Boston and our Commonwealth is able to host this garden year after year and support our families. And to the Boston Parks and Recreation, we are grateful for your support of this event annually. I'd also like to thank the Massachusetts National Guard, including Brigadier General Chaplain Paul Miner, who's here with us today, for being here, along with all of the uniformed service members who are helping us in many facets of this ceremony. To our key sponsors from Hanscom Federal Credit Union and John Hancock, we are grateful to you and your teams who came out yesterday and volunteered, and your support for programs like this so that we can continue to serve our Massachusetts families of the fallen. And from Home Base, I would like to extend a warm and special thank you on top of Tom's to Diane Nealon, who has been a leader and key driver of this event and so much support over the past 15 years. And to all of our Home Base teammates that have been instrumental in putting this ceremony together, including our family team, our outreach team, development, and our network development teams. And finally, I'd like to thank Michael Wasserman and his team for their event planning expertise, and for everyone who helped make this event come together so beautifully. Now, I would like to ask you to rise for the presentation of the colors by the 102nd Intelligence Wing Honor Guard from Otis Air National Base, Cape Cod, and please remain standing for the singing of our national anthem by First Sergeant Caroline Cole.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets rang clear, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ready, cut. Right, hey. Start.
Thank you so much. Please be seated. Today, we gather for our 15th annual Memorial Day ceremony. We are honored to be joined by so many family members of our fallen, once again, as we pay respect and remember your loved ones. Yesterday, it took almost 600 volunteers to plant over the 37,000 flags in just under 4 hours and in 90-degree heat. Many volunteers have returned year after year over the past 15 in a variety of weather because we all know how important this flag garden is. For all of us, it is a small but a meaningful contribution from the community that allows us to honor our heroes. Thank you all for being here year after year to flawlessly assemble this garden, which we are proud to say will be here on the Common throughout the weekend and through Memorial Day. Before I close, I want to acknowledge the 75 families who have lost their loved ones who are here with us today. It is with each name and every flag that we know you carry on with a deep sense of sorrow. While we can never know the full depths of your grief, it is our hope that the Flag Garden brings you comfort in this pain and the reminder from our community that we have not forgotten your loved one. We have not forgotten you, and you are not alone.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jack Hammond. I'm the Executive Director for the Home Base Program, and I'm a retired Army officer. I am thrilled to be here with you all, and as Michael shared with our new partnership with Mass Military Heroes Foundation, we are thrilled to be working more closely than ever with this amazing organization. As we sit here today, it is one of those bittersweet moments where we celebrate the life, the legacy, and the honor of our service members, but we also miss them. When we look at today, many of us come here for a range of different reasons. Parents, siblings, husbands, wives, children, friends. And each of these are important. And when I look at Memorial Day in general as a veteran, I think of really three reasons that we come together as a group like this. And the first is to honor the sacrifice of our fallen heroes. And that is something we take time each year on Memorial Day to do. The second one is to support their families. And our good friends Diane, Tom, and the team at MMHF have been doing that for 15 years. Tirelessly supporting these families, and we will continue that service. And then finally, we do it to preserve their legacy, the legacy of our fallen, for future generations. When we look at Memorial Day, it stands as a solemn reminder to each of us of the sacrifice that has been made by brave men and women in uniform to safeguard our families and preserve our way of life. It is a day dedicated to honoring their courage, their commitment, and their selfless service. Their sacrifice is a powerful testament to the values we hold dear as a nation. And today, as we gather, we remember and honor each name, each story, and each life. Each was given in the name and service of this country. We're also here to support these families that are here with us today. And as Michael said, there are 75 of those families who have joined us here today. Memorial Day is also a day to recognize and support these families as they have endured a profound loss, unimaginable to the rest of us. We come together not just to remember and honor our fallen, but to acknowledge the sacrifice of these families. Your strength and your resilience inspires every one of us. The entire nation owes you a debt of gratitude that we can never repay. We can only honor you, your loved ones, and thank you for your enduring courage that sets an example for the rest of us. And finally, we look at preserving this legacy for future generations. Memorial Day is crucial for ensuring that future generations understand that millions of men and women throughout our history have sacrificed their tomorrows so that we could come here today and enjoy our todays. There is a well-known phrase that freedom isn't free. And the 37,000 flags you see behind me are a testament to that fact. That is the ultimate price for the safety and security of this nation. So as we enjoy this amazing day and hopefully an amazing weekend and the rain holds off, and I'm still keeping my fingers crossed for the rest of the ceremony, please take a moment and reflect upon these sacrifices made on your behalf. Share this with your children and your grandchildren so that these sacrifices are never forgotten and our liberties are never taken for granted. This will preserve their memory and honor their sacrifice. Several years back, Home Base made a strategic decision to move from a post-9/11 organization, which was done out of necessity. When we stood up Home Base, we had very limited funds and we weren't sure how far we could stretch those funds. And so my predecessor, who was a combat surgeon in Vietnam, made the decision to keep it to the post-9/11 generation. In 2017, we made a decision to open it up to all combat eras, and we held the nation's largest welcome home ceremony for Vietnam veterans, honoring them and welcoming them to our Home Base family. Today, I have the distinct honor to invite 3 Gold Star wives from our Vietnam era. And they will place a wreath in honor of the service of the fallen from Vietnam. I'd like to ask these 3 women, Elaine Savage, Donna Brown, and Donna Mishazak. You should see the spelling, by the way. I had to go ask her. To please come forward and place this wreath with support of our friends from the 25th Marines. And I'd like to ask Elaine to come up and read a quick poem.
Good morning. My name is Elaine Savage. I'm the Vice President of the Gold Star Wives Chapter Boston, and we're here to honor all these veterans who we really know what it is to lose. The poem that they've chosen today was "The Young Dead Soldiers Do Not Speak." Nevertheless, they are heard in still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night and when the clock counts. They say, "We were young. We have died. Remember us." They say, "We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done." They say, "We have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave." They say, "Our debts are not ours, they are yours. They will mean what you make them." They say, "Whether our lives and our debts were from peace and a new hope or for nothing we cannot say. It is you who must say this." They say, "We leave you our debts, give them their meaning. We were young, we have died, remember us." Thank you very much.
For the past 15 years, the City of Boston has graciously hosted this flag garden and ceremony on the Common to ensure that these veterans and their families are not forgotten. Last year, Mayor Wu described to us that each of these flags you see represent a constellation of families that were impacted by these deaths. Today's ceremony demonstrates our city's commitment to these families and serves as an important reminder that their sacrifice is not forgotten. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Mayor Michelle Wu.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank all of you who are gathered here and all of the many, many volunteers who took the time to create this important and striking and necessary display. Thank you to Home Base, COO Michael Allard, retired Brigadier General Jack Hammond, Thomas Crowan, President of the Massachusetts Military Heroes Fund at Home Base, and to all the members of your teams, the countless staff and volunteers who make this event possible and who serve our veterans and families all year long. To Massachusetts Secretary of Veterans Services and U.S. Army Reserve Major John Santiago, we're grateful for your partnership at the state level in making Massachusetts the best possible home for our heroes. And I'm honored every day to work with our Commissioner of Veterans Affairs and Military Families, Commissioner Rob Santiago. Thank you for your leadership. And I don't know why he's standing in the back, but to Steve Kerrigan, who has had a hand in this for a very, very long time and now is continuing to lead in our Commonwealth. Thank you for all that you do and for being here. To all the veterans joining us today, whether you served in the Army or the Marines, the Navy or the Air Force, the Space Force or the Coast Guard, thank you for showing us the true meaning of service and for being with us as we remember your fellow service members. And to the families gathered here today, thank you for the honor of letting us join you in your love, your grief, and your memory. For those of us who have never known the weight of a folded flag, today is a reminder that home isn't just a place that comes into being. It must first be imagined, and then fought for, created, and then protected and defended. Each one of the more than 37,000 flags we see today represents a life given to that noble cause. Boston is proud to be a city steeped in the history of that cause. A city forged by those who were warned of freedom's price and who looked at each other and their families and then across the ocean and said, "There is no price too high for freedom." Today we are blessed to be able to call our city home because of the parents and grandparents, sons and daughters, siblings, neighbors, friends and loved ones who continue to make that choice, who choose to step into harm's way to protect the place and people they love. And every Memorial Day, we plant flowers and flags to pay our highest respect from the bottom of our hearts to those who answer the call of duty, knowing they might not be around for the call to come back home. Today, we remember them. We thank them. We thank their families. And every day, we honor them in how we love and care for our communities and one another, the sacred freedom and beloved home they gave their lives protecting. Thank you.
I would now like to invite my good friend and colleague, Chaplain Brigadier General Paul Miner, to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning. It is an honor to be here with you today. We are grateful for the sponsorship of now the joint Massachusetts Military Heroes Fund and the Home Base Veteran and Family Care Organization. I have the privilege of introducing the most sacred part of our program and an annual tradition in the Commonwealth, the roll call of names of the brave men and women who voluntarily answered the call of duty and gave their lives in service to the country and the world. These ultimate sacrifices have occurred on battlefields abroad, in hospitals after critical illnesses, in dangerous training exercises, and far too often as a result of hidden wounds of war here at home. It is important on this, the 15th anniversary of this tradition, to remember why we read these names in a list that grows longer year by year. Simply put, we read the names to connect with our fallen, to remember them, to honor them, to dignify them, to mourn them. In this way, we fulfill our vow to remember and honor the ultimate sacrifice of our fallen always. Please remain silent as I call forth the families and friends of our brave heroes to read the names of their loved ones as we plant the final flags in their honor, completing this Memorial Day Flag Garden tribute. To my right, your left, those who will be reading the names are encouraged to stand and find your name if you haven't already. And then to my left, your right, the flag planters, also to stand and make your way, if you haven't already, to your seat that has your name there.
Good morning, and I just want to apologize if I massacre anyone's name. It's not my intent. Sergeant Glenn Richard Allison. First Sergeant Joseph A. Anastasio. Specialist Scott Anthony Andrews. Petty Officer, Second Class, Jason T. Areza. Sergeant Andre M. Orojo. Private First Class, Zachary T. Arsenal. Specialist Brian Arsenal. Corporal Joseph Arzolo. Corporal Nixon Joseph Aurori. Sorry about that. And my son, Sergeant James Anthony Ayub II, Army Medic.
Lance Corporal Alexander Arredondo. Mom is present. Love you.
Master Sergeant Edgar Ayala. Petty Officer, Third Class, Michael Avery. Specialist David Joseph Babineau. First Lieutenant Andrew John Basevich. Specialist Joseph L. Ballard. Command Sergeant Major Martin R. Barreras. Sergeant Robert John Barrett. Private First Class Matthew Allen Bean. Private First Class Terry J. Bean. Sergeant Gregory Allen Belanger. Staff Sergeant Joseph Paul Bellavia. Specialist Keith David Benson. Petty Officer Second Class Andrew Bebo. Staff Sergeant Alicia Anna Burchett. Sergeant Mineris Bones Cepeda. Sergeant Michael Bono. First Lieutenant Joshua Lauren Booth. Corporal Jeremy Paul Bouffard. Specialist Matthew George Boulay. Private Second Class Michael Edward Butho.
Sergeant Timothy Bowe, Sergeant Fallon Boyle, Sergeant First Class Christopher Boyton, Petty Officer Second Class Christopher Berenzia, Major David Lawrence Brodeur, Major Stephen Brothers, my husband Sergeant Robert Lee Brown, Major Harold E. Brown, Jr., Specialist Ari Daniel Brown Weeks, First Lieutenant Mark Nathaniel Brunel,
Corporal Jake Walter Bryan. Sergeant First Class William James Burdick. Lance Corporal Jeffrey Charles Burgess. Hospital Corpsman Megan Barnes. Sergeant Jeremy David Bushy. Captain Joel Eric Cahill. Sergeant William John Kerr. Specialist Nathan B. Kane. Staff Sergeant Robert Ryan Pirelli. And my boy, Lance Corporal Shane Matthew Cabino.
Sergeant Charles Todd Caldwell. Major Jeffrey Ray Calero. Sergeant First Class Keith Allen Callahan. Staff Sergeant William Joseph Callahan. Sergeant First Class Joseph Kamara. Sergeant Andrew T. Campbell. Sergeant First Class Robert Campbell. Hospital Corpsman Matthew Kaplas II. Sergeant Luke J. Carrero. Staff Sergeant Emily M. Carroll.
Lance Corporal Jeffrey Robert Kerr. Captain Michael Anthony Cerrone. Private First Class Daniel Clark. Sergeant Timothy Clinton. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Clooney. My husband, Colonel Brett Conaway. Private First Class Paul Edward Conlon. Specialist Michael Benjamin Cook. Petty Officer Third Class Christina Cooley. Staff Sergeant Jeremy Coombs.
Grace's godfather and my brother, Major David Scott Connolly, Colonel Robert Cattell, Specialist Michael Cullinan, Master Sergeant Sean L. Cullinane, Specialist Daniel Francis Cunningham, Staff Sergeant Darren James Cunningham, Corporal Kevin Dabrowski, Staff Sergeant Alexander P. DeLita, Private First Class Norman Darling.
Corpsman up. My son, 3rd Class Petty Officer, Fleet Marine Force, Timothy Daw Cook. Specialist, Brendan S. DeRosa. Sergeant, Meg Douglas Deegan. Sergeant, Christopher Delano. Master Sergeant, Louis F. DeLeon Figaro. Private First Class, Research Delva. Specialist, Michael Robert DeMasco. Private Second Class, Corey Ramsey DeFew. Private Second Class, Corey Ramsey DeFew. Sorry about that. Sergeant, Joshua David DeForsh. Lance Corporal, Travis Reed DiCiato.
Private First Class Aaron Cordova Martinez. Specialist Robert D. DeVore. Specialist Joshua Diamond. Specialist Joshua DeMare. Navy SEAL Glenn A. Doherty. Major Michael Donahue. Sergeant First Class Diclesio Anildo Sequeira dos Anjos. Lance Corporal Sean Dugan. Staff Sergeant Michael Downing. Sergeant Craig M. Ducharme. Specialist Mitchell Kirk Daling.
My son, Specialist Jonathan Michael Curtis. Sergeant Shane Padraig Duffy. Master Sergeant Kevin Allen DuPont. Staff Sergeant Joan Jose Duran. Specialist First Class Daniel Eckstein. Sergeant First Class Eric M. Emond. Sergeant Peter Gerald Enos. Chief Special Warfare Operator Michael Ernst. Corporal Paul Fagundis. Airman First Class Zachary F. Fahey.
Our son, Corporal John M. Dawson. Sergeant Andrew Kevin Farrar, Jr. Sergeant First Class Daniel Ferguson. Sergeant Elder Fernandez. Corporal Donald Eugene Fisher II. Specialist Crystal Marie Fitz. Master Sergeant Brian Fletcher. Gunnery Sergeant Elia Payetta Fontecchio. Lieutenant Colonel Morris Fontenot. Lance Corporal Michael Lewis Ford.
My son,
my husband,
his father,
Staff Sergeant
Carlos Dickey, First Lieutenant Travis John Fuller, Sergeant Alexander Henry Fuller, Captain Anthony Fouché, Specialist Robert Gagnon,
Lance Corporal Patrick James Gallagher, Sergeant Matthew Ryan Gallagher, Staff Sergeant Jacob Gallagher, Technical Sergeant Jeremy Gamache, Sergeant Justin Risley Garvey. Thank you.
Our son, Private First Class Christopher Dona. Lance Corporal Edward Marcel Garvin. Lance Corporal Demetrius Gabriel. Chief Warrant Officer Maron Gabor. First Sergeant Alan Nye Gifford. Sergeant Daniel Robert Giannet. Specialist Ryan Golday. Private First Class Ethan Lewis Gonzalo. Specialist Nicholas A. Gordon. Private First Class Michael A. Gorman.
Corporal Kiara Marie Durkin. Sergeant Edward Savvy Grace, Lieutenant Colonel Michael J. Green, Specialist Michael J. Grella, Sergeant Paul Grossweiler, Sergeant Matthew K. Grover, Specialist Bernardino Guevara Jr., Specialist Stephen Edward Gutowski, Major Wesley Hallowell Jr., Chief Warrant Officer 4 Eric Anders Halverson.
Our son and stepson, First Lieutenant Christopher Ferrantino. Private First Class Peter J. Handybode. Specialist Anthony Hardy. Sergeant Kyle Joseph Harrington. Captain Jennifer Jean Harris. Private First Class Sean M. Harris. Private First Class John Daniel Hart. Staff Sergeant Miguel Angel Harriara Nolasco. And First Lieutenant Derek Stephen Hines. Sergeant Tyrone A. Hines.
My son, Specialist Stephen Robert Fortunato, First Lieutenant Christopher D. Holbrook, Specialist Christopher James Holland, Colonel David C. Hooker, Senior Airman Nicholas J. Hoover, Chief Petty Officer Kevin Arthur Houston, Sergeant Josiah Herico, Specialist Richard B. Hubble III, Specialist Theodore J. Ingmanson, Specialist Kenneth James Iwazinski.
Major General Harold Joseph Green, Lieutenant Colonel Leon Gifford James, Staff Sergeant Alex Ramon Jimenez, Specialist Melvin Jimenez Jr., Private First Class Marcus James Johnson, Staff Sergeant Mark Johnson, Specialist David H. Johnston, Captain Eric Alton Jones, First Lieutenant Ryan Patrick Jones, Specialist John D. Kane, Lieutenant Colonel Gerard Eric Hill, Private First Class Evan G. Kasabian, Private John D. Keeney, Sergeant Michael Jason Kelly, Specialist Amanda Kelly. First Lieutenant Robert M. Kelly. Captain Wesley Lawrence Keniston. Chief Warrant Officer 3, Kieran Edward Kennedy. Sergeant Adam Patrick Kennedy. And Sergeant First Class Raymond B. Kerr.
Sergeant First Class Jean Baptiste Kessie. Private First Class W. Beckett Kiernan. Seaman Apprentice Chad Kierstead. Corporal Paul Nicholas King. Private First Class Kevin James King. Specialist Tremaine A. King. Private First Class Justin Candido Kirby. Captain Sarah M. Knutson Cullen. Captain Mariah Kochevi. Lance Corporal Andrew Kranick.
Chief Warrant Officer 3, Scott R. Landis. Private First Class, John Francis Landry. Petty Officer First Class, Jason Dale Lewis. Staff Sergeant Laney Lang. Specialist Kyle Andrew Little. Sergeant Matthew Lombardi. Sergeant Daniel Jesus Londano. Private First Class Brian C. Lounsbury. Lance Corporal Jeff Michael Lucy. Lance Corporal Gregory Edward McDonald. Specialist Frederick McGuire. Sergeant Patrick Ryan Mayer. Captain John William Maloney. Staff Sergeant Michael Mantenuto. Senior Chief Petty Officer John Wayne Markham. Private Second Class Jason Evans Martin. Corporal Andy Jose Martinez. Specialist Aaron E. Mastrorio. Staff Sergeant Joshua L. Matero. Staff Sergeant Adam Matos.
Master Sergeant First Class John A. McCarthy. Contractor and Army veteran Christian McCoy. Specialist Brian P. McDermott. Private First Class Daniel A. C. McGuire. Sergeant Rachel R. McKay. Specialist Brandon L. McManus. First Lieutenant Brian Michael McPhillips. Our son, Second Lieutenant Ian Thomas McVeigh. Sergeant Benjamin Enrique Mejia. Master Sergeant Hector Melendez Jr.
Private Jose Enrique Mendez LaSalle. Sergeant John L. Mirsky. Major Brian Michael Mescal. Staff Sergeant Scott Joseph Metcalf. Captain Seth Robert Michaud. Sergeant Randy Miller. Sergeant Scott A. Miller. Our son, First Lieutenant Scott Francis Milley. Major Glenn G. Milliken, Jr. Sergeant Sean Montgomery.
My husband, Master Gunnery Sergeant Edward F. Mashazik. Sergeant First Class Alton D. Gutschall. Captain Barry McGowan. Sergeant First Class Jared Christopher Monty. Sergeant Alberto da Silveira Montron. Chief Warrant Officer 4, John S. Moore. Colonel James M. Moore. Private First Class Brian Michael Moquin. Corporal Nevin R. Morea. Specialist Jonathan Morgan. Master Sergeant Neil Morrison.
Private First Class Dominic Moram Knopp. Specialist Eric Moses. Lance Corporal Roger W. Muchnick, Jr. Specialist David A. Mulno. Private Anthony Munoz. Specialist ATN Murphy. Staff Sergeant Carl Edward Noskin. Specialist Christine Muthani Nudruri. Staff Sergeant Daniel Allen Newsom. Specialist Donnie Wen. Sergeant Andrew C. Nicole. Petty Officer 3rd Class Nathan Nisay. Captain Leaf E. Knott. Staff Sergeant Joshua Denali. Sergeant David Terrell Nutt. Staff Sergeant Kevin J. O'Boyle. Specialist Greg O'Brien. Staff Sergeant Sean C. O'Connell. Private First Class Brian P. O'Diorn.
Private Jeffrey R. O'Connor. Lance Corporal Walter Kearns O'Hare. Corporal Brian Michael Oliveria. Sergeant Ryan Patrick O'Malley. Staff Sergeant Araceli Gonzalez O'Malley. Private First Class Evan William O'Neill. Corporal Christopher Orlando. Corporal Peter Orlando. Petty Officer First Class Scott O'Toole. Petty Officer First Class Brian Joseph Olette. Specialist Nicholas George Outhughes. Petty Officer Third Class Jacob Orchard. Specialist Gabriel Delmino Palacios. Captain Anthony Palermo. Sergeant Matthew Pardica. Captain Jamal Paul. Lieutenant Colonel Jason Pelletier. Private First Class Joaquin Pereira. Sergeant Theodore Lewis Peralt. Staff Sergeant Lloyd Perryman. Specialist Nicholas Peters.
Sergeant First Class Daniel Henry Peditori. Specialist Eugen Pierre. Staff Sergeant Christopher Neil Pepper. Specialist Michael Pierres. Sergeant First Class Stephen Policarpo. Specialist Matthew Michael Polini. Contractor and Army veteran Josue Ponce Castaro. Sergeant Jason Poole. Sergeant Marcus Richard Porter. Specialist Dennis C. Poulin. Lance Corporal Kevin Thomas Preach. Lance Corporal Eric J. Preston. Specialist Travis Prince. Corporal Scott Jonathan Pocapiro. Civilian contractor and Army veteran Paul Prozinko. Staff Sergeant Matthew Albert Porcino. Specialist First Class Alexander A. Quinn. Captain Alexander N. Braffopolis.
Sally's son, Sergeant Pierre Antoine Raymond.
Sergeant First Class Louis Stephen Renfro.
Specialist Jared John Raymond. Specialist Andrea M. Reed. Sergeant First Class Donald Reese. Specialist Jean Carlo Reyes. Our son, Captain Ross A. Reynolds. Private First Class Jonathan Richard Roberge. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Lewis Robinson. Lance Corporal Matthew Rolando Rodriguez. Sergeant Nelson D. Rodriguez Ramirez. Staff Sergeant Rob Laura Rolfing. Our daughter, Sydney Ammon Deanna Kelsey Richards. Lance Corporal Michael Rodner. Sergeant First Class Robert Edward Wooney. Sergeant Giovanni Rosario Pichetta. Technical Sergeant Patrick Rood. Airman First Class Casey Ruris. Staff Sergeant Bruce Aaron Rushford. Land Corporal Timothy Ryan III. Captain Benjamin Wilson Samis. Sergeant Kurt Daniel Chamber.
Senior Airman Nathan Satane. My husband, Captain Charles J. Savage, Jr. Lance Corporal Nicholas David Scavone. Ensign Evan Scollard. Private First Class Kerry David Scott. Airman Sean Sears. Specialist Corey Michael Shea. Sergeant Benjamin William Sherman. Master Sergeant Sean Elliott Simmons.
Captain Benjamin A. Scaliver, Captain Alexander O. Smith, Private First Class Eric J. Smith. My son, Technical Sergeant Jeffrey John Smith, Sergeant Jordan Snow, Staff Sergeant Alan Leigh Snyder, First Sergeant Dennis J. Sparrow, Staff Sergeant Stephen A. Sprague, Private First Class Clinton Edward Springer, Sergeant First Class Michael J. Squaw Holly, Sergeant Jordan Michael Shea.
Corporal Matthew Joseph Stanley. Sergeant First Class Eric Vernon Staple. First Lieutenant Timothy James Steele. Specialist Jacob Stiles. Sergeant Sean Michael Stoddard. Staff Sergeant Clint Joseph Story. Captain Christopher James Sullivan. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas J. Sullivan. Special Agent Stephen Eric Sullivan. Sergeant First Class Severin Summers. Sergeant Brad A. Savoda. Private First Class Antonio Siracos. Specialist Luis Taveras. Sergeant Sean Thibodeau. Private Second Class Deshaun Miles Thomas. Private Second Class David E. Thomas. Staff Sergeant Virgil Thorpe. Specialist Carrie Lynn Thurber. Sergeant Joshua Owen Tipton. Petty Officer Second Class Tyler John Jahan.
My brother, my oldest son's namesake, Sergeant Zachary Daniel Tallier. Specialist Penhareth Trelong. Sergeant First Class Rambo Tran. Petty Officer Third Class Caitlin E. Trask. Master Sergeant Gregory Ray Trent. Private Matthew Truby. Lieutenant Colonel Keith L. Underwood. Lance Corporal Eric Paul Valdepenas. Captain Kyle Rolf Van de Giesen. Lance Corporal John James Van Guyson IV.
Sergeant Daniel Mark Vaselian. Staff Sergeant Miguel Colon Vasquez. Sergeant Mark Richard Vecchioni. Private Second Class Miguel Verdejo Polanco. Corporal David Marquez Vicente. Private Keely Ree Walsh. Sergeant Major Kevin Walsh. First Lieutenant Michael Walsh IV. Sergeant Dennis Paul Weichel. And my son, Army Specialist Jason John Welch, LTF OOY.
John Wells' son, Chief Warrant Officer 2, Stephen Michael Wells. Staff Sergeant James Wento. Specialist Christopher J. Wheeler. Staff Sergeant Maudlin White. Major John P. White III. Sergeant Brandon K. Weiland. STS 3, Jake Thomas Williams. Sergeant Christina R. Willis. Sergeant Christopher M. Wilson. Specialist Raymond Wise.
Private Jeffrey Raymond O'Connor.
Sergeant Keenan Wolford. Sergeant William Joseph Woteus. Sergeant Gregory Anthony Wright. Corporal Nicholas George Zuharis. Our son, Lance Corporal Andrew Jonathan Zabrick. And Corporal Edgardo Zayas.
We want to thank you all. You may be seated. We want to thank you all for coming today. And on behalf of the Mass Military Heroes Fund Board that have served you for the last 15 years, it's been our honor, and we hope that we lived up to your expectations with this flag garden over the last 15 years to bring home the message that Memorial Day is more about picnics and opening up cape houses and mattress sales, that it's about remembering and honoring. And families, we have been humbled that you choose to spend your important and sentimental weekend, emotional weekend, with us and share your memories of your loved ones with us. We invite you, following the last song by the Army Band, God Bless America, we invite you families to have lunch with us under the tent. Thank you so much.